and thanks for everyone for joining in. I'm excited about this opportunity. So I am talking about capturing the stories of our families and communities, a youth project. I am currently the genealogy librarian at the St. Tammany Parish Library in Covington, Louisiana. Those who may not be familiar with Louisiana, instead of counties, we have parishes. So this is like a county library system. I have been there just under a month. So this has been a crazy 3 to 4 months as life has totally changed. Before that, I was a university librarian at Quincy University. And I had done that for about 3 years. Before that, I worked on a project called Teaching with Primary Sources from the Library of Congress, both in Pennsylvania and in Illinois. And that's what brought me to Quincy, Illinois to begin with. So I worked on the project as a trainer for 3 years, south of Pittsburgh in California University of Pennsylvania. And then we moved to Quincy, Illinois to be a director of the same project at Quincy University. And really what the project did is we worked with teachers to get the students to use historical documents or primary sources in the classroom to help engage the students. So one day when I was in Pennsylvania, the director came in and asked if I thought it would be beneficial to have students participate in the Veterans History Project. And I told him, I had taken an oral history class at college, loved the experience, so I think it's a great idea. And I had seen how using primary sources in the classroom took students that next level away from just reading the textbook and listening to lectures, but to actually engage in history. And I saw the effect that that had on student learning. I really didn't expect to see what oral histories did. That even took it to another level. It was a fantastic experience. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. What I learned through that process of working with youth and having them do oral histories. So the first thing I want to do that went too far, is find out more about our participants. So I'm going to transfer over. And let me see. I'm going to try copying this link into the chat. And have you go to this link and let me know who's participating. Are you a youth leader, an educator such as a teacher, professor, librarian, a parent, or another adult that's interested in participating in the project? And maybe if you're a grandparent, you could actually also click on parent. All right, looks like we have a variety, but we have quite a few parents. We have some educators, a couple of youth leaders, a youth, some others. All right, I'll give this a couple minutes or a few more seconds, and then we'll move on. All right. Then the next question is your activity with oral history participation. I have talked to someone about their life experience, but I haven't recorded it. I did this with my grandmother's aunt. She moved across the street from our high school, and so every Wednesday I would go over and talk to Aunt Susie about what life was like in Missouri during the horse era, how they moved to Oklahoma by horse and wagon. But I never recorded those stories. Or have you had a personal conversation with someone that you've decided to record for your own personal preservation? Have you recorded for a project such as StoryCorps or the Veterans History Project, something that's being preserved in a national area? Or I have not participated in interviewing someone. You're here to learn. All right. And it looks like we really have a broad gamut. A lot of people who have done it unprofessionally, per se, and a few more who want to learn. And so that's great. All right, so I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. And talk a little bit more about my experience, what I saw take place as I worked with youth in conducting these interviews. As I mentioned, this was with the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. So we went through, selected the quality interviews and sent them on to be stored at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. as part of the Veterans History Project. So when my boss had come, the director of the program had come and asked about this, we put the message out to teachers that we were working with, and we had selected a pilot project in Washington, Pennsylvania. That was more of an urban type school, very high poverty, minority area. And so we worked with her AP history class. And we would go in and we train the students about different aspects of doing the interview. They did the interview and then submitted those. And several of them wrote letters back. And those letters were fantastic. And that's really when I saw what was taking place. So one of those letters, he talked about that they were threatened if they did not do well on this project, that they could fail the class. So he said, I walked into that interview only doing this out of fear of failing the class. I walked out of the interview with a new hero in my life, the veteran that I interviewed. We had another one who was a freshman at the university that went through our project. And she had interviewed her grandfather. We'd given her the copy of the DVD that we made. So at Christmas, the family gathered together and they watched that DVD. And she came in right after Christmas when we got off a break and came in and said, as we were all sitting there as a family watching this video, I realized that I have a connection with my grandfather because of this experience that nobody else in the room had. Choose connection. As those who've listened to Steve Rockwood talk, watch the music video, the theme this year is choose connection. This is a project that connects the youth to the other generation and has fantastic experience. We had another one. Usually we try to do this with high school students, a lot of times junior and seniors. But we had a 6th grade teacher who came to us and said, I have a student who is really struggling in history and he wants to get his grade up. So he's asked to do an extra credit project. His great grandfather served in World War II and is in the nursing home. I would like him to interview his great grandfather. And so she said, will you work with him? And we said, yeah, we'll work with him. She said, I know it may not go to the Library of Congress, but really the experience is what I want him to get out of this. So we worked with him and he did the interview. A month later, she calls and says, he's been talking to his friends about this. I have a lot of students coming and asking if they can do this too. And so we said, yeah, we'll work with them. By the time she gathered the students up, there were 60 students in the classroom that we were working with that wanted to participate. By the end, that last session before they went on and did their interviews, they had collected memorabilia from their veterans, and they had decorated the entire walls of the classroom with this memorabilia. These sixth graders were excited. Now, of these 60 plus interviews that we had collected, 3 of them we sent to the Library of Congress. But really, it was the experience that these students went through and the effect that it had on them. Now, when I moved to Illinois, the veterans who built the World War II monument that you see in the picture there, the white globe is the monument. There are actually medallions on that globe for the different conflicts with the Pacific Theater and the European Theater. The World War II vets of Illinois collected money to build this monument. When they were finished building the monument, they realized they still had funds left over. And they were figuring, okay, what can we do next? And they came up with an idea to buy equipment for schools for students to go out and interview veterans. And so then they brought students into Springfield for a week, put them up in a hotel, train them about doing interviews using the equipment, and they actually interviewed a veteran. And so since they found out that I had participated in the Veterans History Project in Pennsylvania, they contacted me and asked if I would come and help with this project. And I said, yeah, that's great. So the first day when the students, and they also said, oh, and we'll put you up in the hotel with the students. And I thought, oh boy, a week in a hotel with students, I'm not going to get any sleep. That wasn't the case. It was a fantastic experience. So the first day, they came to the state library. They got to meet their veteran, fill out some paperwork with their veteran. Then we taught them how to use the equipment and helped them develop questions. Then the next day, the veterans came back. They did the official interview. And then Wednesday and Thursday, they took that interview and they made a documentary, like a Ken Burns type documentary. But one of the things the veterans had asked them to do is each student who participated, they wanted a 1 minute, 60 seconds of how this project has affected them in their life over this week. Wow. I didn't require that with my students in Pennsylvania. That was a powerful 1 minute. You really saw what the students are getting out of this project. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But that's the analysis. The students are connecting. And one of the things I want to share with the connection part is Friday, we invited the veterans back for lunch, and we showed these documentaries that the students had made during lunch. And so we figured, okay, lunch is going to be noon to 1. We're going to show the documentaries at that point. And then everybody will clear up and leave by about half hour after lunch. So we will pack up and we'll be gone by about 2 o'clock. 3 o'clock came up around 2 hours after lunch was over and the program was done. The students and the veterans were still staying around talking. I was sitting next to a guy from Chicago Public Schools, an administrator, who had come to find out about the project, to go back and share with his teachers at CPS and to get some schools involved in participating in this project. And he leaned over to me and said, nobody's going to believe this. These teenagers are talking to these older men and women for 2 hours when they could be on the road going back home. But they're staying here talking for 2 hours. That's the connections that take place. The involvement. This is actually becomes real. When we were getting ready to leave that Friday morning from the hotel, I was in the elevator with a group of students. And I asked them how the week has gone. And one of them said, "It is so weird. We were finishing up our documentary at 2:00 this morning. And I turned to my friends and said, it's 2:00 in the morning and we're doing homework and we're enjoying it. Something's wrong." It's not just an assignment, it's an involvement. And getting them to analyze what has taken place and how this affects their lives is very important. So one thing that I have seen with working with youth with this project is it helps them identify themselves, gives themselves an identity. It gives them purpose, something to do. And one thing I saw with that analysis is they see the blessings in their life. A lot of these World War II vets have gone through the Depression and then went out and fought with their own lives at risk. And a lot of these youth commented on how these veterans risked their lives for their own freedom and how they're glad they don't have to go through the things these veterans had to go through as youth during the Depression. About how grateful they are for the freedoms they have because of what these veterans have put up. So really, they start comparing these veteran lives to their own, and they really see what has taken place in their own life. So in preparing and doing the interview, some of the things that I've learned is one, the importance of doing preliminary research. It's not a major research project, but it is important for students to delve a little deeper into the topic of the person they're doing the interview with. The Library of Congress has a biographical data form that is to be filled out. So one thing we've suggested with the students, if you're doing the Veterans History Project, is to take that form with you beforehand to meet the person you're interviewing, fill out the form, and a lot of times as they're filling out the form, stories will come out. I told the students, write down information about those stories. That is going to become important in your research process and in developing questions. So if you don't have a form, I would suggest just putting together a basic form that they can fill out with the students. Or a lot of times when I've gone to people's places to do interviews, they'll have pictures out and papers out already to talk to the student about what has taken place. That again is very important. Then the student can go back and do some research. They don't have to do a lot of research, but do some research. And I've noticed the students who've done who've gone through this process, their questions get really into the meat of the matter. Those who don't are just asking very surface level questions, and you're really not pulling the story out of the person. And then after they've done research, learn a little bit more about the person, where they've been, what they've done in their life, then start developing questions. And then we help the students develop questions. And one of the things that we talk about is the importance of using open-ended questions. Keep away from those yes, no answers. And so one of the things that we suggest is that students create a list of about 50 to 100 questions. The Library of Congress has sample questions that can be used. There are lots of websites out there that we show the students with sample questions. So it's not really something that the student has to come up with all on their own, but there are resources out there to help them. One thing also we teach them that this is not a checklist. You don't, okay, ask this question, ask this question, ask this question. You actually want to tailor your questions around what the person you're interviewing is talking about. So one of the things that we've done is we play sort of like a 20 question type game where the person can only say yes or no. And we have each person think of either activity that they've been involved in or a hobby that they have. And then we pair them up and one person will ask the other questions, but the person being interviewed can only say yes or no. And we do this for 1 minute. And they really struggle in that 1 minute. And most of them do not even find out what the hobby or activity is. Then we switch and have the partners interview the other person and go through the same process. Then we talk about how much of a struggle it was by asking closing-ended questions. So then we talk about the who, what, when, where, why, how questions. And we do the same thing, but now we have give the students 2 minutes, and they are to ask only the who, what, when, where, why question and how questions, the open-ended questions. And at 2 minutes, the timer goes off. We tell them to switch, and they're always like, but we're just getting into this. I thought, okay, 1 minute, you're completely ready to be done. 2 minutes, and you really want more time. And this really shows the importance of asking those open-ended questions. And then we discuss the difference between open-ended and closed-ended questions. And one of the things a lot of students will bring up is when the person just says yes or no, you just have a few seconds to think of the next question to ask them. Where if they've gone on and talked for quite a bit of time, you have a lot of time and a lot of material to develop your next question. Now, the next activity is something my son came up with when he was doing his Eagle Scout project. Now, he had gone with me to the Veterans Home in Quincy and prepared a lot of the vets to do their interviews. And so he got to know quite a few of the vets. And so when he started working on his Eagle Scout project, he came to me and said, I would like to do it with the Veterans History Project. Now, I told him as an Eagle Scout project, what I would like to see, though, is that he take a leadership role. And I said, one thing with the Eagle Scout project, you're to be a leader. So I would like you to train other scouts. You can do interviews too, but I want you to train scouts to do interviews. And so he prepared a way to train scouts. One thing that he did is he would bring a veteran with him to the training and would start interviewing the veteran. And before he started interviewing, he would hand out pads to each of the scouts and said, when the veteran is talking about something, I would like you to write down a question that you would ask based upon what he's talking about. And so he would ask about 3, 4, 5 questions, and then he would stop and he'd be watching the scouts as they're writing things, and he would start picking students out. Okay, I saw you wrote down a question. Go and ask your question. He said, everybody else listen as the veteran's talking and continue to write questions, because I'm going to start picking from everybody in the group. And the rest of the interview would be from people from the questions that they wrote down. This was a great way to teach these youth how to listen and put down questions of what they want to learn more about and get that interview onto a deeper level. Okay, now with conducting the interview. Practice with the app or equipment that you're using before the interview. Get to know how to use the app or the equipment. Make sure that you know how to get the interview. If it's not an app that it automatically uploads the interview, like the Veterans History Project does not have an app to upload it to the Library of Congress. You have to do that yourself. Figure out how to get that interview off of your phone or your tablet or wherever you're using, camera system. and how you're going to get that to the Library of Congress. One thing with us moving more to phones and tablets for this is it's a lot easier to get it off, and I can help students better. Where early on when we were using camcorders, especially time as towards the end of the camcorder, a lot of them had docking stations that would connect to a computer. I can't believe how many people lost their docking station. And so we had these great interviews. They were on this camera, and then the family couldn't find the docking station to get it off. And we had 3 interviews that we could not get off the equipment. So that's one thing, get used to using equipment, how to get the interview off, how to use it. Make sure that's picking up sound. So do a practice session with the interview, with the person you're interviewing there to make sure it's picking up your sound and the sound of the person you're interviewing before you actually do the official interview. One of the things I suggest at the end is asking if there's anything they would like to add. It's amazing some of the stories that will come up at the end, or some analysis that the veteran will do. I interviewed my father-in-law when the Iraq War was going on, and he served in occupational Japan. And so he started talking about the comparison of Japan and Iraq. And that was a very interesting perspective. One of the things I like to listen to is Stephen Cap Perry on BYU Radio. He does interviews with people of various faiths. And one of the questions that he usually ends with is, what's the question that I don't know to ask? And what's the answer to that question? And it's interesting, some of the things that people will bring up. So that's a very important concluding question to include. If the youth is interviewing someone who's not a member of the family, or even if it is a member of the family, they can do this. But we encourage them to send a thank you card to that person and thanking them for letting them do the interview. So some of the projects that you can work on, as I've had a lot of experience with the Veterans History Project and working with students with the Veterans History Project. That is something that you can participate in. Another project that I've worked on is a StoryCorps. StoryCorps started with booths that you would go to, like in New York City, and do interviews. You could bring anybody you want with you, do an interview, and then that interview would get stored at the Library of Congress. And they take some of these interviews and they play them on NPR radio. And now they even have a YouTube channel that they put some of these excerpts of these interviews on. Then they bought buses that have interviewing studios in them, and those traveled the country. And then they received a $1 million TED Talk grant to do something with. And so they use that to create an app. And so you can use that app, and now you don't even have to go to them. You can just use your phone and use the app of your phone to interview someone, and then that gets uploaded to StoryCorps and then to the Library of Congress. They also, with this, started a project called the Great Thanksgiving Listen, where they really want to have this big project once a year that at Thanksgiving time, when families get together, they want youth to interview a family member. And so the first year this had happened, the Thursday, he looked at the data, there weren't very many interviews. Friday looked, there weren't very many interviews. He thought, okay, well, and he had been on national television. He said, I'll just go on and say, this was a pilot project. And then he gets a call Sunday. And he said, this really shows how students procrastinate their homework. Sunday, massive interviews were being uploaded. And that one day they collected, I think it was more interviews than they had collected through their booths and their traveling buses. So this is a great project. And this one here is you can interview anybody about anything. Check with your state and local archives, libraries, historical societies, and see if they have a project. At St. Tammany Parish Library, we have the Veterans History Project that we work with, but we also have a librarian who is collecting interviews about the pandemic and people's experiences with the pandemic. And I thought that's really great because I know at the university, when the pandemic started, March of 2020, we had people coming to the library within the university. What did the university do in 1918? What do students have to do in 1918 when the influenza pandemic started? And so it is important for these archives to collect this material because the next time there's a major pandemic, people are going to go back to that. Religious organizations. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a formal oral history project for their members that can be done and can be submitted to the church history library. And there is a section on their website that talks about this oral history project. And I'll talk a little bit more about faith-based projects as an example of an organization getting involved in conducting interviews. The Family Search Memories app. You can download the Family Search Memories app. They have a recording spot in there that you could interview someone. This would have been perfect for those Wednesdays, which we didn't have the app or the phone at that time. But when I visited my great aunt Susie, every Wednesday, if we had the phones and the apps around at that time, that would have been perfect for me to pick a question and record her and save that in Family Search Memories. Now, one thing with you're doing Family Search Memories, if you do it on your account, I'm talking about this with the youth, this will be stored on their account with that person. So when you enter a living person, so let's say they enter grandma, or let's say I enter Aunt Susie. Aunt Susie is still living. So nobody else is going to see that but me. So when I record Aunt Susie, then those interviews would be on my version of Aunt Susie. Then when Aunt Susie passes away, that I put in her death date. Now, if several people had Aunt Susie in there, and several people put in Aunt Susie's death date, now there's going to be a lot of Aunt Susies out there that will need to be merged together. Once all those Aunt Susies are merged together, those interviews that were attached will be accessible by anybody. And so then they can go back and listen to Aunt Susie talk about her experiences. Or if Aunt Susie has a Family Search account, I can have Aunt Susie log in and we can record that on her account. And then when her death date gets put in there, then it will be opened up for everyone. One important thing is when a family member passes away, and I really saw this with my grandmother. My uncle had put his mom in. I had put her in as my grandmother. Some of my cousins had done that. And so when grandma passed away, people went in and put the death date. And then we had all these versions of grandma that I had to go in and merge together into one. So but once you do that, then anybody can go to that person. And if you've done interviews with them, those interviews will be available. All right. Now, in selecting a project, look at the scope of your organization. So I'm going to look at faith-based interviews because this is something that I saw come out of these veteran interviews. that as I saw this happen and how it affected the students, how important faith-based interviews are. One of the things that a lot of these veterans talk about is how prayer got them through the hard times of war, their prayer and their faith. And this is something that a lot of the students in their 1-minute clip picked out. So, this is something it affected the students. They realized, hey, I've really never thought about this before. Wow. And the students are going to come across hard times in life. And so it's important for them to know, how has faith helped you through the hard times? So they see this as a viable option themselves. Another thing that I think would be great for students to talk about with someone is, how have you dealt with times that you question your faith? How did you make it through this? Because all of us have questioned our faith at times. And I think it's important for the youth to realize this is normal and we can make it through this. Our faith can become stronger because of the questions we have. This moves beyond the primary or junior Sunday school answers. My mother worked for years with the junior Sunday school of her Southern Baptist congregation. And one of the things that she commented several times is that she was giving a foundation to these children. And she said it's important as they become youth that they learn how these junior Sunday school answers become real life experiences. And as I listened to a lot of these veterans and their interviews and them talking about their faith and their prayer, helping them through, it makes me think of my mom's comments of how these youth need to transition to these basic answers and how these basic answers result in real life experiences. And doing these faith-based interviews are going to help the youth realize how that takes place. All right, so I'm going to have Rhett go ahead and open things up. And those who have been involved in doing one of these interviews or working, especially working with youth doing interviews, I want to hear your experience. What projects have you worked on? So go ahead and unmute your mic and go ahead and share your experience. And we'll do this for a few minutes, and then we'll go into asking questions that you may have. And we'll do the questions through the chat, but we'll go ahead and open up for the mics here.
So you can go ahead and unmute yourself down in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And let's share some experiences.
Rhett, do you want us to just start talking?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, about 30 years ago, I did an interview with my aunt who had lived with a husband who decided at the age of 25 to put himself to bed and never get up again. Never worked, never did anything. And because I didn't really understand how important that interview was, I have lost it somewhere in my home. So this gives me the idea that I really need to knuckle down and find that interview and do something with it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Phyllis. That is something very important. I interviewed my grandmother and put those on cassette tapes. I have no idea where those cassette tapes are. I really wish I had it. I think that's one great thing with the Family Search app is it has it stored someplace that you can get to it later on. So yeah, thank you.
Jane has her hand up, and then who was just speaking, we'll have you go next.
Well, I am now in my 70s, and one of my earliest memories was listening to family stories at family gatherings, and for some reason, all those names stuck, even if the relationships didn't. And it got me really interested in my family history. So I asked my family for a cassette recorder when they were finally invented. And I did go about and interview my great aunt, and I was really amazed to find out that my great aunt on my mother's side of the family knew my father when he was a little boy. And I didn't know anything about my father. He could have been hatched in a cabbage patch for all I knew. That was even true when I got onto Ancestry and started building my family tree. It was just a connection that I never ever expected, and I learned so much from her about my dad when he was a little boy. But I got to say that, like others, I don't know whatever happened to those cassette tapes. I sure wish I knew where they were. But I'm so glad for the memories and how it has inspired me to make family genealogy a lifelong habit. And now I realize, I tell people all the time, whether it's on Facebook or wherever, if you get to about the age of 40, all of a sudden you wake up one morning and you can't see. That's presbyopia. And then when you get to be 50, you walk out of a funeral and something hits you. Well, by 50, it's too late. At least it's too late to interview the deceased person. So start early. And I am so inspired to help parents get their children involved in doing exactly what we're talking about. Begin the interview process. So I'm a testimony to the benefit of story listening and storytelling.
Thank you, Jane.
Okay, well, this is Skip Ingley. One of the things that I've struggled with is the archival nature of the information that I'm putting together. I do have a computer that actually has an A drive, a zip drive, a CD drive, and a thumb drive connection. But I've realized over the years that the best way for me to provide an archival record of this family history is through written documents, actually writing in a journal or writing on paper, or using photographs and putting together photograph albums. Maybe even a scrapbook might be a good way of doing it. I've got photographs that were taken over 100 years ago that are still legible and still tell a story, whereas cassette tapes are gone. Thumb drives don't last forever. CDs don't last forever.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people to try to at least provide some kind of a backup if they're not going to go through memories or some of the digital archival things that are available to us. And I'm not sure how long those are going to last either, but I know paper and pencil and photographs do seem to last.
Yeah. Thanks, Skip. One of the things I do want to point out is by using some of these things that are connected with a major organization such as Family Search, Ancestry, the Library of Congress, they have archival initiatives in place to keep those interviews and transition those as technology changes. If you're keeping your own personal copy, that is something to be very aware of, that media goes outdated. And I remember in the 80s when CDs came out, we thought CDs were going to be archivally sound. And we have found out that those early CDs are deteriorating. So it is important, if you have these interviews on cassettes, on the old magnetic tapes, that you do find a way to archive those and get it off of there so the time doesn't come. One of the big things I'm finding right now is people who have interviews on VCR tapes. We're having a hard time finding VCR machines that the heads haven't gone bad on. And buying a new VCR, they aren't $25 anymore. They're about $1,000. So yeah, make sure that you're keeping that, if you're personally keeping copies, that you're transitioning it as technology changes.
Hi, my name is Christy Reed, and 20 years ago at Thanksgiving, invited my mother to share her best memories on a CD. And I too don't know exactly where that CD is. So what I have done is go in and make a digital message about what I remember she said, because it was hilarious. She said that she remembered Thanksgiving and the JFK assassination. And that she had been watching As the World Turns, which is a memory my brother and I share. That was my mom, As the World Turns. And then, so she turns the tape off, and a few seconds later, the tape comes back on, and she says, and I never watched As the World Turns again, which is so indicative of my mother's personality. So I've included that. I know there's a lot more on that tape when I find it, but second hand is better than no hand, right? That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy.
Byron, how many more do you want to do?
All right, let's go and do one more and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, Carrie Rose has her hand up.
Yeah, hi. I have a question. I was doing an interview once, and the person I was interviewing just kind of broke down crying. I was doing it remotely, and a relative was with her, and the relative was super uncomfortable with the crying. So just said, okay, we're done. And I'm not sure, do you have any hints on how to deal with emotional moments? And I mean, I would have paused if it hadn't been stopped, waited, and then when she was ready, go on, or ask her if she wanted to go on. But I don't really, do you have any good advice about how to handle those kind of moments when you really hit something that's difficult?
Yeah. And Carrie, this is something we actually talk with, especially those who are interviewing veterans. We'll tell the students, some of these experiences, the veterans have not talked about in 40, 50 years. And so this is the first time they've got to put into words. Those memories are in there, but they're not in words. And a lot of times that's going to bring up emotions that you may have never seen Grandpa cry before. You're going to see Grandpa cry. And so one of the things we suggest is, as you mentioned, Carrie Rose, that to offer to turn off the tape or whatever your recording device, to give them time to get composure back. It's interviewing. Some have said, yeah, go ahead. But we've had a few that said, no, I need to continue on. Now, it's bad. One of these, you can't understand a word he's saying because he's blubbering the whole time. But one of the things that we've seen with these veterans is a lot of this is things that they've not been able to talk about before. And they've been able to give it out for the first time. We had one of the veterans home, the nurse called us after the interview as she was taking him back to his room. And she said that all the way, he just kept saying, I have not been able to talk about this in 60 years. I finally got it off my chest.
And
And actually 2 weeks after that, he passed away.
wow. There,
Um,
interestingly, this was a woman I was interviewing who was a child in France, and she was overlooking the D-Day beaches. And
wow.
the orphanage that she had been kind of hid in was extremely poverty-stricken, had just amazing stories about how they would go steal potatoes from the fields, and then the nuns would take them back and make them pray for forgiveness. But the children were starving. But just fascinating stories. But she just,
Yeah.
understandably kind of lost it during all that.
Yeah. So yeah, Carrie, thanks for bringing that up. That is something very important that, yeah, you may easily come across. I interviewed someone about their Hawaiian cultural experience, who as a kid was playing on this mountainside and always saw planes going over and just thought they were doing bombing practice and realized, no, he was watching Pearl Harbor take place. So yeah, these can become very emotional interviews. All right, I want to thank everybody. We weren't able to get to everybody sharing their experience, but there's a lot of great things out there they participate in. I know someone did ask about if they're a leader in a youth group, they would like youth to get involved. How do they get started? I'm very willing to help, and I will put up my contact information after the questions. I also have activity afterwards. I want you to stay around and participate in it as well. But let's go and answer a few questions.
All right. I still see some hands up. I don't know if they were up from before or if these are questions. So if you don't have a question, you wanted to share an experience, go ahead and lower your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you have a question. Teresa Kinsley. Was that up from
I was
before?
just trying to lower my hand.
Okay, great.
I'm a teacher, and I used to teach second grade. And when we had Grandparents' Day, I had a checklist of questions for the kids to interview the grandparents. And I had the grandparents write the answers in the journal, in that child's journal as they talked. And that was an amazing experience. Things like, what was your favorite book and how did you get to school and stuff like that. But anyway, I just want to make that suggestion. Any teacher out there, it's a great experience.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions? iPhone Lois? Do you have a question?
Am I unmuted?
You are, yes.
Oh, good. You hear me. Thank you so much. I have very much appreciated this. My question is, and I wanted to give a plug to the story room that I went to with, I'm in my 70s and my dear father is in his 90s still alive. And we went to the family history library story room, and oh my, it's a wonderful, and I have it on a thumb drive, and we actually showed it at a family reunion the other day. But my question with that would be, how do I back up that? I have this fabulous thumb drive and I love it. And I've actually made copies of it and given it to my brothers and sisters, but it's way too long for family search. So I'm wondering if there's any ideas on what to do with that.
Yeah, you could load it on a Google Drive and give people access through Google Drive. What you've done is make copies for others. That's a fantastic way of doing it as well. But as you said, videos cannot be uploaded to Family Search yet. They've been looking into that for several years, but there are some logistical problems with that. So that is issue there. And yeah, and also the recordings on Family Search are just small. So recordings that you may have also can be an issue.
Yes, thank you. I don't know whether they have, I'm not too knowledgeable on if they have story story rooms around the world if people can do this, but I certainly recommend it. It's a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
We
Thank you.
have some in some of our larger family history libraries and centers that are part of Family Search. And you can find that through the Family Search Wiki. When you look up the library closest to you, it will tell you what sort of equipment they have for you.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Should we do one more? Vicky?
Yeah, let's
Rook?
do one more.
Okay. Okay, so you can hear me?
Yes, thank you, Vicky.
I'm wondering two things. I have my cassette tapes of my grandma and my father, and I'm wondering how to best preserve those. I was going to listen to them again in my cassette recorder, but I need to make it work again. So I'm just wondering how I could get those things back so that other people could listen to them and enjoy them.
Mhm. One thing that I have done, cassettes, I've been successful at this, is to connect a cassette recorder to the computer and record the sound off and make a digital copy. There are also companies out there that will do it professionally as well. So you can pay them to transfer it into digital form. Someone had mentioned saving things onto an external drive. That actually is a better way than USB because external drives are going to last longer. Also, if you can find an archival place to store the digital copy, a lot of these archival places will keep up the data format as data formats change as well.
Okay. So connect cassette to computer and make a digital copy.
So what I have is my cassette player, and I have an auxiliary cord that plugs into the earphone jack, and I plug it into the recording jack on my computer, start a recording software, and play it, and that records what's being played across the cassette.
Okay.
Or if you don't want to do that yourself, you can find, there are lots of companies out there that will digitize it for you.
Right.
And some of the larger Family Search libraries will have some equipment that can digitize those recordings as well, whether it's a cassette tape or 8mm or VHS tapes. Some of the larger centers will do that.
Okay. And then the other question is, if I want to record like my mom now, is the best way to do that just with my phone?
Yeah, probably the best way is to record with the phone, and I would highly suggest doing it with the Family Search app. So that way it has some place to go on a permanent basis.
And then my understanding is that that's not available to anyone else until she would pass away. Is that what
that's what I was thinking, Rhett, is that someone made a comment that they had put photos up that actually became public, and they didn't realize that they were going to be public.
It was my understanding as well, but I will double check.
Okay.
Because as I think about it, there are pictures of.
If I could add something to that, I think the deal is that if you put a caption on the picture, that Google search can find that picture through that caption. Otherwise, I think if you don't do that, the picture probably stays private.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
So go ahead and go to this and put in 1 to 3 words of things that have come up that really you got out of this. And those words will come up. Those who put in the same word, it will become larger. This is a great activity to do, especially with youth, to see what they got out of it. And also they may see words come up. Oh, I didn't think about that. And it is a thinking process. So this is called a word cloud.
We're not seeing the word cloud.
We're just seeing questions.
So is the word cloud not coming up on the screen?
Oh, we just see questions. Okay, I'm going to mute everyone. So Byron, you're going to need to unmute yourself here in just a second because it will
Okay.
mute you as well. Okay, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, Byron.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're seeing your screen that says questions, not the word cloud.
Okay, that's, let me try stop sharing and then try sharing again.
And while he's doing that, once this session ends, we will lose the chat that has happened in Zoom, but there is also a chat room associated to the session page where you click to get into this Zoom, and we can continue the discussion there.
Now, are you seeing the word cloud?
We are, yes.
Okay. I must have shared the PowerPoint off the screen. So, okay. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to the PowerPoint. This is my contact information. Feel free to contact me at byron.holdeman@ctpl for St. Tammany Parish Library.us. I'm very willing to work with you. Questions that you may have, or I'm even willing to do a Zoom session with a group to get you started, or a Zoom session with you. So feel free to contact me. I'm very willing to help anybody that wants to get involved in doing interviews or getting youth to do interviews. And I want to thank you for your participation and for all the great experiences that have been shared.
Thank you. Thank you, Byron. That was fascinating and so inspiring. Thank you for the work that you have done to preserve the stories of so many, especially our veterans. And thank you, everyone, for your wonderful comments and your feedback and your attendance at Roots Tech. I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting, and we will post the recording to this meeting within the next, probably toward the end of the day, where people can go back and review it if you want to and share it, and it will be available for the next several years. Thank you, Byron. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
And thanks, Rhett.
All right, bye-bye.